Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, February 11th, 2020. It's New Hampshire's primary day. Very exciting. I'm breathless. Daily Co's Radio is live now. We are reminded from Maine, not New Hampshire, but Maine, by Bill in Portland, Maine. Daily Co's Radio live now. Great being in New Radio Shire with Kagro X. He says this morning, I would say that this is the biggest radio show in New Radio Shire history. Incredible morning, which should be, of course, read. Incredible morning. The president is up and bragging that his rally in New Hampshire last night was the largest, probably in world history. I think he only limited it to being the largest in the history of the state. Of course he did. That's exactly what he's going to be doing. Probably with the rest of his day and the rest of his life, wherever he goes. He just assumes that it's the biggest everything. Lots happening on Twitter today. Results are in from Dixville Notch, which we'll report here, I guess, from just plain Dixville, I suppose, here at Kagro in the Morning World headquarters. Dixville Notch, by the way, a fake through and through, I learned yesterday. Yesterday, I was years old, I guess. When I realized that this was the case, I saw tweeted around for our listening pleasure a link to a podcast which I'll save for you and pass on in the day's summary post, because of course if I were to play NPR's 17 minute podcast on the subject, we would be subject, rightfully so, to copyright claims. But a very interesting thing that I'll summarize for you, that basically Dixville Notch, it currently no longer exists, really, is basically what it comes down to. It was fake from the beginning, more or less. But it was a very interesting piece, and you should actually listen to it, from NPR reporting. Let me see if I can bring it up. I don't think there's much in the way of a written summary of what goes on. But just so you know, I mean, we all, I guess, now are a part of the game in which we pretend that there's this small rural town in New Hampshire that, unique in America, votes at midnight on the day of Election Day. And this is the place where the people are, I don't know what, the most American. They take their duty as American citizens the most seriously, etc., etc. Well, all right. Long story short-ish, in our fashion. This will take about 4 hours to get through. It's a tradition that began in the mid-1930s, as I recall, which is a long time to have a tradition. It's coming up on 100 years. After a manner of speaking, and so, whatever. We revere it because it's old and dusty. That's what we do in this country. As it turns out, Dixville Notch doesn't really exist as a town, per se. What was there, when it was there, was like an old-style mountain resort for rich people, you know. And, you would go there and pass the summer away at one of those old-timey grand resorts where, things happen like The Shining, where you get murdered. You know, that sort of thing. The idea of being, go up there for the summer and get murdered. And that's very high society thing to do. So, it had been there for X number of years, hundreds of years, an old, dusty old place. And I guess it was on its way out when in the mid-30s, it was purchased by, I guess, what amounts to the local millionaire. Neil Tillotson is the name of the guy behind the phenomenon of Dixville Notch. And while we're all meant to believe that these are plain, simple folk, Norman Rockwell types, scrabbling for a living out in the mountains of New Hampshire, as it turns out, Neil Tillotson got the money to, one, purchase this resort, and two, promote this idea of Dixville Notch Americana. in the latex business. He'd made millions of dollars in the latex business, and okay, whatever. You use your money for whatever you want. I don't care. Anyway, so what he did was essentially buy up this resort, and he continued to operate the resort. But what became the town of Dixville Notch, the bucolic hamlet of Dixville Notch, was this unincorporated area that didn't have a town, it didn't have a town hall, it didn't have houses, really, or at least it doesn't now. I guess it must have had some outbuildings then, but basically it was whoever worked at the resort, essentially. Anyway, he got the idea that they would be doing this, but it wasn't his idea to vote at midnight on the day of Election Day. Apparently there were towns all over, not all over New Hampshire necessarily, but there were a few in New Hampshire that did the same thing, and a few towns all over the country that did the same thing, that on Election Day they opened up the ballot boxes at midnight, and because it was such a small place, everybody went at midnight. But back in the 30s, it was a real phenomenon when you could, in fact, report those results. For a long time, people did it, and it was like, well, some backwater in Texas would do it, and, that's great and all, but getting the national press to take notice and go down there and cover 15, 20, 30 people casting ballots wasn't the thing. You didn't spend money on that. How did it come to pass that you could spend money on that in Dixville Notch versus anywhere else? And the answer is that Neil Tillotson made it possible. He went out of his way to make sure that the press would do this. And he cut a deal with the Associated Press to say, back in 36, this was a big innovation. We'll call you with the results and we'll phone them in and you'll have them. And this will be, for the first time that in the morning edition of the Tuesday papers, Election Day Tuesday papers, you'll have results to report because we'll give them to you. And in subsequent years, when he was trying to promote the idea of having the press come there to cover, he had a hotel on his hands where he could put up the members of the press, and they had plenty of workspace. So it was ideal for giving the press what it needed, i.e. handing them the story and putting them up in hotels. It was ideal for giving the press what it needed to create the story, to make the story viable for the morning news of Election Day papers. So what do you know? They loved it, and it caught on. Now, as it turns out, there's a town next door to what, the area that they used to stage the Dixville Notch town that had been, and I think it was like Millsville or Millersville. It's actually quite a, boring name versus Dixville Notch. That's, very New Englandy and et cetera, et cetera. So a very small town. It has to be small, right? It's a notch, So that caught on. But the next town over had been doing it for longer and did it, kind of legitimately, just decided, I guess, a local person, a young woman, as a matter of fact, in her 20s. And you'll have to listen to the whole thing as NPR presents it in order to get the real flavor for it. But young woman who organized a similar thing in her town and just had everybody in town over for punch and cookies, essentially, at her house until midnight rolled around, and then they'd all walk to the polls and cast their votes together. So, there were some charming stories along the way, to be sure. For instance, the story of, I guess in New Hampshire, I guess anybody, any town, anywhere, I guess, can opt to open its polls at 12 at midnight. But what made Dixville Notch special was, of course, that you could report the results for the morning paper, which means, I guess the rules, I don't know whether there's state statutes about it in New Hampshire, probably by now there are. But if you were going to report the results, you had to make sure that every voter was accounted for if you were going to essentially close your polls and count the results and report them early. Otherwise, you'd be required, I guess, to keep them open until whenever the polls close all across the state, and that would obviate the effect of early voting for Dixville Notch or wherever. So there were some humorous stories about having to round up people who hadn't yet shown up. Back in the day when there were 40 or 50 people milling around the resort that masqueraded as the town of Dixville Notch, you'd have a few strays. And there was an interesting story about one drunk guy who had to be rounded up and dragged to the polls. And it presents some interesting challenges, being able to make sure everybody gets the chance to vote early enough that you can report the results. But anyway, over the years, of course, the fact that there's no actual town there, plus the fact that the resort changed hands after Tillotson died and eventually closed down. And apparently the place has been closed since 2011, closed completely. There's no buildings there, and I guess, I don't know it's not even clear who the people who claim to live in this town that doesn't exist actually are. One of the other parts of the story was that in the process of covering the famed Dixville Notch early voting, somebody, I guess last time around, noticed in the video that was being broadcast, it's a small state, New Hampshire. People know each other, right? I see somebody on TV there who's casting a ballot in Dixville Notch. That guy doesn't live in Dixville Notch. And then it came to pass that the state conducted an investigation and found that none of the people who supposedly were residents of Dixville Notch and casting their ballots in Dixville Notch were in fact considered by the state to be residents of Dixville Notch. They had primary residences elsewhere. And though presumably none of them were found to have been casting ballots elsewhere as well, there was some real question about the validity of even the 5 or 6 votes that were being cast in Dixville Notch. And I guess they decided at the end of the investigation that while there were questions about every single ballot cast in Dixville Notch, they ended up not prosecuting anybody. But how ironic is that as it turns out that the focus of Americana here, every single person there is possibly guilty of voter fraud of some kind. But whatever. We let it slide for various reasons. The way Dixville Notch, I guess part of the story was the way they cemented their status as first in the nation, because anybody could compete with that, was that they would also do midnight voting. When they made the decision to also do midnight voting in the primary, that sealed it. I mean, nobody is as early as the first in the nation primaries in New Hampshire. And so they had locked in the position of first in the nation to actually vote. Now, the neighboring town apparently has some designs on possibly trying to wrest that away from Dixville Notch, both on the grounds that there is no Dixville Notch and the grounds that everybody voting in Dixville Notch is possibly guilty of some sort of improper voting, if not voter fraud per se. And the fact that there's a real town involved, and it might be better news coverage, but everybody seems to be sort of married to the idea of Dixville Notch. Although there is also, what's the other one? Something location, right? It's somebody's location with an H, right? How come I can't remember that? Anyway, I guess they're in competition for this too. But anyway, it was kind of fascinating how the guy sort of created the illusion of Americana and how thoroughly it's seeped into our idea of what America is. And I don't know whether it's ironic or just straight up normal and logical that it turns out that our idyllic ideas about Americana and democracy, etc., are fake as well. So very interesting to have heard that. I hope you will get a chance to listen to it as well. Is there any simple way? What if you're not? Well, okay. If you're not reading the roundups at the end of the day, I can't help you. I mean, I can. I could offer you up the URL. It's WNYC, the New York public radio station that does it. So if you want to find it and you just can't wait because you're like Dixville Notch at midnight, you got to hear this thing. It's you can find it at wnycstudios.org. And it's, you could probably just go to that and find your way through the podcast. But you want the whole thing? wnycstudios.org/podcasts/OTM on the media. That's the sub genre here, the category, on the media /segments/Dixville-Notch. And it's DIX, by the way, in case you're getting any funny ideas about that. So enjoy yourself looking for that stupid URL. I don't know what to tell you. So can you navigate it this way? I'll just go to WNYCstudios.org. I guess if I click on our podcasts up on the right, and then there's on the media. There you go, in the second row there. I'll click on that. And then, I don't know. I guess there's segments. And is this it? Picture Perfect Democracy, the history of the American primary, the first town to vote, and New Hampshire reporters do some self-reflection. Is that the one? I'll click on it. I'll let you know. Oh, wait, that's the listen button. We can't do that because that'll screw up that'll screw up all our plans. The first town to vote. Yeah, well, you'll find your way there. It's not my problem. God damn it. Anyway, maybe it's an old... could even be an old podcast. I don't know. Follow the link is what I'll tell you. And how about this? If you're listening live, I will retweet at some point the tweet that brought it to my attention. And then we'll all be very happy. Anyway, plenty of other things to get to today. Let's see. There's more about New Hampshire and things going on there, of course. I don't know if that's really top news at this point. I think, we're still, of course, in sit and wait stage. We won't know anything at all until later tonight, and possibly not even then. Another tight race in the offing, it seems, and we'll have to wait for results to come in. I'm not super excited about that, and I'm not super excited about any of the contests yet to come until Super Tuesday. That's when you're supposed to get super exciting, right? Okay, lots of other things to catch up on, things we didn't hit yesterday, things that are new since yesterday. Let's see, where to start? One of the things that we could do, I really do want to spend some time at some point diving back into the Atlantic article from McKay Coppins that we spent time on Friday and didn't get back to yesterday, but that was raising some seriously worrying points about the new disinformation/propaganda operations being run by the Trump campaign themselves. They've brought it in-house. It no longer needs to be done, I guess, in Russia, though I'm sure the Russians are getting much better at what they're doing and are probably anxious to help again. Except that will require some poking around to find where we left off, and it'll probably eat up the rest of the segment, the rest of the first two segments to carry that out. So I don't know. I guess I'll just bring you into my decision-making process about why we would or would not go back to that. Let's instead stay relatively current. I've got one or two other interesting things. Let's try this one. This is actually an interesting development. I picked up on this one at Talking Points Memo. Josh Kovensky is reporting it, but it's one of their member-only articles, and I'm not a member. So I don't know whether I'll be able to bring you, probably not, bring you the whole story, but a very clever tactic going on that'll be of some interest. Of course, Jeff Bezos is the owner of Amazon, right? Amazon and the Washington Post, finds himself a Donald Trump target, or to be clearer about that, finds himself the target of Donald Trump's ire for various reasons. And in addition to the smarmier story of Trump perhaps being in league with the Saud family of Saudish Arabia, Saud-owned Arabia, and the National Enquirer and its parent company and other gossip-type tabloids, hacking his phone, downloading his the pictures with his girlfriend and causing the divorce, etc. We've heard all about that. In addition, though, there is Donald Trump using the levers of government to try to punish Jeff Bezos in the now ongoing lawsuit in which Amazon is suing over the steering of a potentially lucrative contract with the government away from Amazon and to some other competitor, allegedly at the behest of Trump himself, in order to keep that money out of Bezos's hands. The sort of thing which is an illegal and unconstitutional abuse of power, for which ordinarily a president would be impeached and removed from office, but which Trump and his ilk believe ought to be considered a legitimate use of presidential power. It's a real tragedy that we have such people in America. Anyway, what is of interest here, though I can't tell you a great deal about, unfortunately, is that the filings from Amazon and I guess from Bezos himself in this, I can't really describe how the parties are situated in this because I can't read the article because I'm not a member. Maybe I should be. But they are utilizing a very interesting tactic in trying to convince the court that Amazon has been wronged here by Trump and his government by listing as it says here in the headline, a litany of alleged Trump corruption in order to argue that there's a pattern of behavior. I think a really brilliant way of bringing in embarrassing and incriminating and impeachable information into the public record. Basically arguing, well, we believe this was done by the Trump administration to hurt us. And part of our proof is the admittedly circumstantial evidence that this is something he likes to do to people all the time. For instance, there's this, and this example. And in addition, just generalized examples of his willingness to stretch the boundaries / outright break the law in order to gain advantage either in business or in lawsuits or in politics. And that this is just a part of the pattern of behavior of the president, and you ought to believe that he would be willing to do this to Amazon as well. So I liked it. Interesting tactic. Might bring a few good things to light or remind the public of some of the things that have been discovered along the way. And now is a good time to do it because we're entering into an election. Let's see. Other stories much talked about. HuffPost has a piece that has gained a lot of currency because of funky organizational name that is includable in the headline. DOJ grant to, you ready? You probably heard about this one already. Hookers for Jesus triggers whistleblower complaint, according to a report. How come? It is odd how many whistleblower complaints there are about Donald Trump. It seems like there's another one every day. Subheader here reads, group picked to deal with human trafficking victims has required past clients to engage in religious activities. You would guess that from the For Jesus appendage to their group name. Sarah Lynch actually reporting for Reuters, and I guess I'm merely rereading it aggregated over at HuffPost. But I have a feeling that may have been where you saw it too, if you got a chance to see it. The article begins this way. A U.S. Justice Department anti-human trafficking grant. They're not anti-human. They're against human trafficking, you see. The grant program is facing internal complaints after two nonprofits were denied funding in favor of two less established groups whose applications were not recommended by career DOJ officials. So there's a real story here. It's not just that money went to a group with a funny name and one that, makes you think that they might be of dubious provenance, Hookers for Jesus. It's that once again, just as Jeff Bezos alleges in his lawsuit, the Trump administration is improperly steering government funding to cronies, friends, and allies of the president for political reasons. The awarding of more than $1 million in total to the two groups, Hookers for Jesus in Nevada and the Lincoln Tubman Foundation in South Carolina, that's a much more upstanding sounding kind of name, has triggered a whistleblower complaint filed by the Justice Department's employee union to the department's inspector general. They are very busy there. An internal department memo seen by Reuters shows that as of September 12th, two long-established nonprofits, the Catholic Charities of the Diocese of Palm Beach, really, and I don't know where Palm Beach, and Chicanos por la Causa of Phoenix, were originally on the list of recommended grant winners after receiving high marks from outside contractors hired to review applications. The annual grants help nonprofits and local governments aid human trafficking victims. Later that month, these two organizations were replaced as recommended recipients by Hookers for Jesus and the Lincoln Tubman Foundation, which both received lower rankings from the outside reviewers. The reason, a September 23rd memo says, was an effort to distribute funding across as many states as possible. And it's always possible to come up with a plausible reason, and that's not an implausible one, except, of course, we'll go on and read the rest of this thing and see whether it falls apart on closer examination, but we'll have to do most of that on the other side of the break. The change was ultimately approved by Catherine Sullivan, head of the Office of Justice Programs, or OJP, which awards the grants. Sullivan defended the process as proper. Our funding decisions are based on a merit-based review system, she said. In December, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, Local 2830, filed a complaint in which it asked the Inspector General to investigate whether politics factored into the two grant awards. An Inspector General's office spokeswoman declined comment. In a statement, Union President Marilyn Moses said the grants call lots into question. I'll begin by telling you exactly what in 2 minutes. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Shall we continue with finding out about just what the hell happened with Hookers for Jesus, or what? I think so. Let's continue on here. The union president, and again, we're talking about the union representing career workers at the Department of Justice who ordinarily facilitate the review of grants like this. They are Local 2830 of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. Perhaps you've heard of them by their acronym AFSME. But if not, ask me about it sometime, and I'll tell you. Oh my God. All right, the radio show is over. I'll see you later. Anyway, the union president, whose name is Marilyn Moses, said that the grants call into question the department's mission to serve the public. Our employees take their responsibility to the taxpayer very seriously, she said. So, wow. That was worth waiting for that quote. All right, maybe not. Anyway, this is the second time recently that the union has challenged the grants review process. Chicanos por la Causa has opposed the Trump administration's immigration policies. The head of Catholic Charities in Palm Beach, is it Florida? Palm Beach? That one? Has participated in past Democratic National Committees as a delegate or standing committee member. Both groups said they filed strong applications and intended to continue competing for grants. So you see where the problem comes up for the Trump administration. Both of the groups have, quote-unquote, opposed the Trump administration on something. Chicanos por la Causa opposed his immigration policies. It's not difficult to imagine. And the head of Catholic Charities in Palm Beach has been a Democratic National Committee delegate to a meeting of some kind, whether it was a national convention or not. I'm not sure. But he's a Democrat. He or she is a Democrat. And so, therefore, bad. They can't have the money. Which is, of course, counter to everything that a normal presidency would do. It's in keeping with everything that probably people wish their partisan presidents would do, but it's usually recognized that that's not permissible, and they don't take the opportunity. But that's what and that's what Trump fans love about Trump, to be honest. Anyway, each group, Reuters found, was ranked as a Tier 1 applicant, the highest level, after scrutiny by outside reviewers. And so you can't even blame it on stupid government bureaucrats. The review was done outside of government, which may or may not be a good idea, but okay. Once again, another one of those examples of things that were perhaps instituted with the idea in mind that they were necessary and proper reforms of the system, but they end up being attacked anyway as improper or worse than the original problem, etc., etc. Anyway, so each one of them was found to be a Tier 1 applicant. That's the highest one. Hookers for Jesus and the Lincoln Tubman Foundation, by contrast, were ranked in Tier 2, one level lower. I don't know how many tiers they have, but it's lower. To help select grant recipients, the Justice Department contracts with outside experts called peer reviewers who evaluate and score applicants. That sounds like it's been in place for a while, the sort of thing that you can imagine well-intentioned reformers instituting and whatever. The reviewers' identities were not listed next to their comments, so Reuters couldn't contact them. So they're doing it in secrecy. This is how you would level an attack against a good government reform. Career Department officials then receive a blind copy of the average weighted scores and divide them into tiers, with the top scores being closer to 100. They review the applications, scores, and reviewers' comments to help inform their recommendations, which gets the final sign-off from OJP leadership. Remember, Office of Justice Programs. DOJ staffers recommend the 2 Tier 1 groups. They recommended these 2 Tier 1 groups that came in. I don't know whether there were more Tier 1 participants or not, or whether that was the entirety of the Tier 1 ranking, not sure. The subsequent decision to bypass 2 higher scoring groups in favor of those with lower scores deviates from past practices, said several Department of Justice veterans. Tier 1 generally is your default. They all get funded, unless there is some kind of legitimate reason not to fund them, said Gene Brueggemann, a former DOJ Office for the Victims of Crimes fellow, that Office for the Victims of Crime, DOJ worker, okay, who is now executive director of the Freedom Network USA, a coalition aiding trafficking victims. Hookers for Jesus, which received $530,190 over 3 years, is run by a born-again Christian trafficking survivor who has lobbied against decriminalizing prostitution, okay, a policy position aligning with many in the Republican Party. We don't have to linger on that, but that's not out of the ordinary. I mean, Hookers for Jesus is something out of the ordinary, or it sounds out of the ordinary, but that policy isn't so. It's not out of the Republican mainstream anyway. Hookers for Jesus operates a safe house for female adult trafficking victims that in 2010 and 2018, both years, maintained a policy of requiring guests to participate in religious activities. I don't know what happened in between. Internal program manuals obtained by Reuters through public records requests show. So I guess they made some requests and they got the manual from 2010 and 2018. Presumably in all years in the interim, they required religious participation. The safe house's manuals had rules that included a ban on reading secular magazines with articles, pictures, etc. that portray worldly views / advice on living, sex, clothing, and makeup tips. So I guess that's like you can't read fashion magazines, Cosmopolitan or whatever. Other rules limited everything from who victims could call to banning them from bringing their purses with them on weekly shopping trips. Rule breakers could be penalized by being assigned chores such as washing windows. I mean, it doesn't tell me a great deal, quite honestly. I don't know how the others operate. It sounds a little weird, but then I'm not a hooker for Jesus, so what do I know? Hookers for Jesus founder Annie Lobert denied that her organization requires Safe House residents to attend services at her church. We are not going to discriminate towards anyone, she said, but she added, we are Christian, and there is an understanding that they come in here that we are Christian, before they come in here that we are Christian. If the policies described in the 2018 manuals continue after the federal grant money is dispersed, they would likely violate anti-discrimination laws that prohibit using federal funding to engage in explicitly religious activities, some lawyers said. The fact that the federal government is funding this is problematic, said Dallas Hammer. That's a real person's name? Dallas Hammer. And it sounds like a arena league football team, but okay. An attorney, he's actually an attorney specializing in discrimination law. Now there's a small typo here. There's no space between the in and discrimination. So it makes it look like he's an attorney specializing in indiscrimination, or indiscrimination law anyway, but that's not the case. The decision makers here could be walking the federal government right into a clear violation of the First Amendment, which protects freedom of religion. But who cares? LOL, yellow, nothing matters is essentially where we are on this. Sullivan, the OJP's principal deputy assistant attorney general, said the policies described to her by Reuters from the manuals are inappropriate. She added, this might be something that may be appropriate for our civil rights department to look at. Those are not facts or things that we would know ahead of time. In its grant application, Hookers for Jesus did not discuss its religious focus in detail. How could you miss it? And the department did not have access to its program manuals before the award was announced. But Sullivan disputed the notion that Tier 2 scores are significantly inferior and said the department was justified in awarding the two grants because there were no other Tier 1 scored applications in Nevada or South Carolina for that grant category. Geography is among factors that can be considered, but experts said it typically comes into play when deciding between two groups rated at the same level. In 2019, OJP offices collectively awarded more than $100 million in grants to help human trafficking victims, with much of the funding to be paid out over 3 years. Of that, $53 million went to 77 groups, including Hookers for Jesus and the Lincoln Tubman Foundation, that provided direct services to trafficking victims. The Lincoln Tubman Foundation awarded $549,345 over 3 years, was launched by the daughter of a prominent local Republican who supported President Donald Trump as a delegate to the 2016 convention and is close to South Carolina Republican Senator Tim Scott. Its founder, Brooke Burris, told Reuters that services for adult trafficking victims in the Charleston area are severely lacking. She said the foundation will fund her Tri-County Human Trafficking Task Force project to offer more direct services and train law enforcement to better spot victims. We have almost no resources, she said, noting that South Carolina's state laws did not outlaw human trafficking until 2012. Well, that's a mistake. The need for more awareness was apparent during a recent training session her task force hosted with law enforcement. Few officers raised their hands when a former FBI agent asked if they had ever dealt with human trafficking. In September, South Carolina's Senator Scott wrote a letter calling on OJP to do a prompt review of the application. A Scott spokesman said such letters are standard for grant requests and he didn't endorse the project. I don't know whether he endorsed the project or not, but that is true. They are standard for grant requests, and I wouldn't read anything into that in particular. OJP's Sullivan said the grant review process was the same for all recipients, and the letter from a senator would not influence a funding decision. Likely true. Reviewers cited the Lincoln Tubman Foundation's lack of experience. The task force is still in its infancy with little or no experience, they wrote. I knew some of those were our weakest points, Burris said. Formed in 2018, the foundation is headquartered in a mansion owned by her parents. Well, no resources, but okay. But she said she is looking for new office space. Meanwhile, she said she's been fielding calls at all hours to help adult trafficking victims find hotels. This is not, maybe they need funding, but I don't know. Maybe they should get started on their own. This is not the first time Hookers for Jesus has received federal grant money, though. In 2017, Nevada announced it was giving Lobert's group nearly $300,000 through the Federal Victims of Crime Act. In her grant application at the time, Lobert said church participation was voluntary. Guess you would hope they would tell the truth about that. The funding was not renewed in 2018 after the state obtained Hookers for Jesus program manuals, saying it was mandatory for guests of the group's shelter. The shelter being called Destiny House, by the way, which also sounds like it could be the name of not a arena football league, but, who knows what. Never mind. Anyway, why get into that? It's inappropriate to talk about that in the context of human trafficking rescues. Anyway, the manuals say it was mandatory to attend services and to volunteer at a specific church. Its staff training manual said homosexuality is immoral and abusing drugs for pleasure is witchcraft. So I guess that gives you some idea of where they're coming from. Reuters obtained the manuals through public records requests. One Nevada grant reviewer in 2018 questioned whether Hookers for Jesus treated victims like prisoners, or in fact trafficked in them, I guess. While another observed the program seemed too controlling and expressed concern that it forced victims to attend Bible study, the grant review documents show. We felt their policies were not victim-focused or evidence-based, said Kelsey McCann Navarro, whose office in Nevada's Division of Child and Family Services decided not to renew the funding. Lobert denied having policies requiring religious participation. She declined to provide Reuters a copy of her updated manuals. She added that she did not recall that the 2018 versions denounced homosexuality. That's probably something we don't have anymore, she said, because they've evolved since 2 years ago. Reviewers evaluating its 2019 federal application said Hookers for Jesus staff had little experience handling forms of human trafficking involving minors, men, and foreign nationals. That seemed to be important. In an interview, Lobert questioned the expertise of the reviewers. I really caution when someone says they're an expert, she said. Unless they run a safe house or have survived trafficking themselves, they don't have true expertise. It's a point you can make, and it might even work. Let's see. Where are we time-wise? Yeah, okay. I guess, well, one thing I was thinking of, maybe I can save this for another day. Let's see. So, that's an interesting one. Now, I've been prompted here with another story that is occupying a lot of time. But I don't know. I was going to not deal with it just because. But let's deal with it since it's there. Jack Ox has forwarded to me this story that is occupying a lot of time in the primary fights, and guess what? It involves Bernie Sanders. Can you believe it? And here's the thing. I don't know what to make of this except to say, I mean, if I do this, am I both sidesing this? I think I am. If I do this, so here's the complaint: the Bernie camp supporters, I don't know whether the campaign is involved in making this complaint officially or not. I couldn't tell you. But here's the deal. There are supporters who are very angry with Chuck Todd, which is ordinarily something I'm perfectly pleased to hear. And the complaint is this. I guess Chuck Todd had, now if this was the complaint, Chuck Todd is interviewing who here in this? I think I need to turn to another source in order to get the whole thing right here. Yes, okay. So Chuck Todd is speaking to, dang, I had it all set up here. Who's being interviewed here? Why is this not immediately apparent to me? I was reviewing this a second ago, and now it's all gone. All right, well, at any rate, maybe I'll just go through it this way. I'm flipping back and forth between the Twitter view of what I have here and the opposing review of what's going on here. Why it's not immediately apparent to me who was involved in the conversation is troubling. But okay. Chuck Todd is on his stupid show, and they're talking about the primary, and they're talking about Bernie Sanders, and obviously it's Chuck Todd. He's not going to have anything good to say about Bernie Sanders. And that's a legit complaint. But what ends up happening is Chuck Todd is asking his guest about, all right, well, maybe we're getting some answers here about who's on and where. Chuck Todd, there we are. Okay, Joan is listening in and listening. Chuck Todd is talking to, but who's he talking to? I can't, is it, why is, it's right on the tip of my tongue, and I know exactly who it was, and now I wanted to double check on my knowledge of it, but I don't have the information at hand. And I don't know, for some reason it seems important who he's talking to. It's not a Bernie Sanders person either. So neither of them are going to have much good to say about Bernie Sanders. Anyway, I should get right to it. The charge is, that's being passed around on Twitter, is Chuck Todd needs to be fired. And okay, I'm all right with that one. But Chuck Todd needs to be fired because he called Bernie Sanders a Nazi. Well, did he? Well, he called his supporters Nazis. Well, he called his supporters brown shirts, and those are Nazis. Well, that's certainly true, and that's disgusting because, of course, Bernie Sanders is himself Jewish. Bernie Sanders himself had relatives, I don't know how close or distant, lost in the Holocaust, murdered in the Holocaust. You might as well just say it that way. So this is one of those instances where they say, we got to get rid of him. Here is a Newsweek article that Joan is pointing me to. Fire Chuck Todd, trends after MSNBC anchor quotes article. That's the real problem. Comparing Bernie Sanders supporters to brown shirts. And that's the big difficulty. What is everybody now editing out who he was talking to? Every article I'm looking at that used to have the name of the person he was talking to on the show, Ruth Marcus. There we go. Finally, somebody has left that one in there. And I guess Andrea Mitchell was also on the panel. And, you're not going to get anything good about Bernie Sanders out of that panel, to be clear about that. But the way it's circulating online is, for instance, here the tweet that Jack Ox forwarded to me. This is disgusting. Chuck Todd just called Bernie supporters his brown shirt brigade. Bernie Sanders' family members were murdered in the Holocaust. Chuck Todd must apologize immediately. And maybe he should. Maybe he should be fired. But maybe it should be for other reasons. I have at my fingertips now, of course, not only the Newsweek thing, but I've got the Daily Kos write-up of it as well. Earlier, I had seen the Crooks and Liars write-up of it. And I guess what I think is missing context-wise in this is that he's quoting an article. Now, is that enough? Should you quote such an article? Is such an article so stupid, misleading, and biased that you shouldn't be using it? And that might be something where you have I don't care if you fire Chuck Todd. That might even be a good idea. But to turn that into, well, Chuck Todd said Bernie's a Nazi. Well, there are several steps in between this and that. And that's not even what the tweet is saying. It's that supporters are brown shirts. And I get where that's coming from. That's from people robustly fighting with others online. And the complaint about everybody is that their supporters bully everybody else or shout people down or try to push them out of the conversation, which is kind of what happens in primary season and why I don't like primary season so much. Here's the Daily Kos write-up of it here. It comes from Walter Einenkel here, who writes under this headline, Chuck Todd sticks Holocaust-sized foot in his mouth when talking about Bernie Sanders supporters. And I think that's a pretty good distillation of it. Like, again, there's certainly reason to question, Chuck, why did you think that article was the one you ought to be quoting in all of this? And his answer is, because I wanted to say something bad about Bernie Sanders, I guess. And that's where the problem lies. So, there's legit complaint in there. Walter writes it up this way. There are a few things that traditional media outlets harp on when it comes to various Democratic candidates, and it very infrequently has anything to do with their policies. Another serious complaint. Chuck Todd, a hack from way back, as he says, was hosting some roundtable punditry on MSNBC on Monday, which he really ought not to be doing, when he decided the best way to criticize Senator Bernie Sanders was to bring up the online support Sanders' campaign has had over the past few years and its aggressive nature. That's an issue, but I thought that at 50,000 feet, Chuck Todd should maybe be talking about something else, I would say, and it sounds like Walter agrees. In order to do this, Todd quoted from an article by right-wing writer and executive editor at The Bulwark, not necessarily your best source there, Jonathan Last, who analogized Donald Trump's following to Sanders's, writing, "No other candidate has anything like this sort of digital brown shirt brigade. I mean, except for Donald Trump." Todd went on to finish Last's thoughts that maybe, just maybe, there needs to be an online mob for a candidate to be viable in today's world. Todd threw the question to the group, none of whom batted an eye at the strange analogy to the Nazis' infamous paramilitary. Besides being a silly-billy thing to say, not unlike blaming school shootings on same-sex marriage, it's a wildly anti-Semitic analogy to strike, especially when the candidate you're talking about is both Jewish and has family who were murdered, with the support of an actual brown shirt force in Nazi Germany. So it goes on to explain a little bit about the brown shirts and questioning whether Chuck is being intentionally anti-Semitic by reading this conservative view of the world as a legitimate talking point. Well, probably not, is Walter's conclusion. I doubt Todd even considered how crappy a thing. I don't know why. I've had complaints, by the way. Am I the only radio show that gets complaints that the host doesn't curse? I mean, I do. You hear it all the time on Twitter. We talked about this a little bit yesterday, but I don't know. I'm going to have to see. We'll convene a blue ribbon panel to discuss what to do about that. Anyway, it was a crappy thing to say, but it shows how and what traditional liberal media outlets like MSNBC consider apolitical rhetoric. Apolitical? Yeah. Well, that's what it says. This analogy isn't supposed to be incendiary in the least, which is why Todd used it. Unfortunately, it is. And people like Todd should know better, and that's really true. There's an asterisk on that. We'll see what that might mean down at the bottom of the article. Sanders' senior advisor, David Sirota, and his campaign's national press secretary, Brianna Joy Gray, went online to slam Todd and the media's characterization of the senator from Vermont's supporters. The tweets are embedded here. I think they're absolutely right to be upset. And I don't care if they're calling for firing Chuck Todd, certainly. But I did think there was some additional context that ought to be thrown in there. The asterisk, by the way, says, frankly, they should know better than to read the Bulwark for their ideas on a Democratic primary in the first place. And that's probably the best point of the whole thing and about where I come down on it. But, yeah, it was a pretty stupid direction to take the show. But through the telephone game of Twitter, by the time I was seeing the complaint online from Bernie Sanders supporters, it had morphed into, can you believe Chuck Todd calls Bernie Sanders the Nazi? I mean, we got a real Nazi in the White House, and they're calling Bernie Sanders. Okay, hold on a second. Let's unravel that. Now, Jack Ox's tweet does not make that, the tweet that was forwarded anyway, doesn't make that. At least the accusation appears accurate and correct. Chuck Todd just, even so, maybe not entirely. Chuck Todd just called Bernie supporters his brown shirt brigade. He chose to read someone else referring to them as a brown shirt brigade, and that's a bad idea. And there are, let's say conservatively, 257 million other articles that make the same complaint, legitimate though it may be, without resorting to language like that. And like I said, if you're smart, you haven't got your nose in the Bulwark to begin with. I agree with Walter on that one. Okay. we could perhaps dive back into that. But it was important. Thank you, Jack, for forwarding that, because there are an awful lot of people talking about it. I didn't consider it to be something that was worth a whole lot of time, just because I hate that crap so much. But, very many people actually thought that that was worth their time, and why not? There's a real thing happening there. And, another strike against Chuck Todd. That ain't bad. I don't mind reporting on that. That's for sure. All right. Let's see. A few other things that we might be able to sneak in at some point. But we are coming up on our first hour rolling to a close, and our top of the hour break. Joan will be joining us at some point during the second hour. So we'll just leave the door open for that. I don't want to get into too much else. We'll leave the door open for her to help direct the program during her time here. But a lot of you have also been tipping me off to the story out of the Bureau of Land Management as well. So we are aware of that. And I guess to give you a brief summary of what that's all about. Let's see, I've seen the New Republic tweeting about this as well. Trump's head of the Bureau of Land Management, William Perry Pendley, says it is now policy that BLM law officers will defer to self-proclaimed constitutionalist county sheriffs, who have vowed not to enforce federal environmental laws on public lands. A huge shocker for all of us who thought that maybe the Trump administration was going to follow the law and Constitution, etc. But I guess not. We're disappointed once again. But that among many opportunities the Trump administration has taken to violate federal environmental law just for fun. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So I guess we could follow up a little bit on the BLM story if I have it close at hand. This includes links to a few other stories here. Let's see. First of all, the tweet of Adam Fetterman. Reporting fellow for Type Investigate. I'm not even certain what that is, but that's the Twitter handle for it. But new with Type Investigate and Politico magazine, a BLM whistleblower, and there's the other whistleblower for the day, in Nevada says his office, which oversees millions of acres of public land, is failing to uphold and enforce environmental rules and regulations. A culture of lawlessness has been engendered. And I think here the link is to Politico's coverage of that story under the title, "This is the Wild West Out Here." And it is the West. So he's got that part right. How Washington is bending over backward for mining companies in Nevada at the expense of environmental rules. And let's see, what's the link? In the New Republic, I guess, has its own write-up of the issue here under the headline, "The Trump Official Who Could Obliterate Public Lands." I guess specifically focusing on this William Perry Pendley person, who is, their subheader says, believes the oil and gas industry should be allowed to plunder the country's natural resources. Okay. Well, what an interesting take that is for the director of the Bureau of Land Management, to no one's surprise, of course. Now, whether or not that's something we spend enough time on, or we do a sort of brief roundup of some of the other stories that are bubbling up, I think we'll opt for that as we leave the door open for Joan here. The other story out of New Hampshire yesterday, I noticed this tweet, and maybe this is something we want to talk about at some point. The tweet is from Jonathan Lemire. Is that how he says his last name? Lemire, and he's a checkmark kind of famous person, White House reporter for the AP. Perhaps you've heard his name pronounced aloud and can tell me. But he notes this in a filing on Trump's New Hampshire rally. Advisors hoped, believe it or not, that Secret Service moves in Manchester for the Trump rally to secure the area for the president would make it harder for Democratic candidates and their supporters to traverse the state's largest city in the hours before the primary's first votes are cast. Isn't that nice? Yes, using government funds for obviously political purposes. I mean, really, honestly, we've crossed the line as it is anyway, since he needs to get federal protective services while having political rallies. But add to that the fact that it is election interference, or interference in the primary election of the other party paid for by federal funds. Seems particularly interesting. The AP's story on that one, filed by Jill Colvin and Jonathan. As well, Trump plunges into New Hampshire race, aiming to rattle Dems. I don't know how much he rattled them with the speech, but I guess the idea was to rattle them with the logistics as well. Okay. I don't know. We'll see whether, we'll leave it again up to Joan. Maybe I'll just lay out a smorgasbord of stories that she can choose from in addition to what it is that she'll be bringing us of her own choosing. I imagine it merits mention at some point, though it is a more localized story. It is happening in New York City, and New York City is rather large and something of a Democratic stronghold. Just wanted to mention out there that somehow the Mayor de Blasio, finds himself again somehow at war with the New York City Police Union. Over what? I don't know. It doesn't matter. They're angry at him, and they make it pretty clear in the SBA Twitter accounts view of things. Mayor de Blasio, they tweet, "The members of the NYPD are declaring war on you." And that's a dangerous thing, of course. "We do not respect you. You do not visit us in hospitals." I don't know whether that's that he doesn't do that or they don't want him to. Maybe some of both. "You sold the NYPD to the vile creatures, the 1%, who hate cops but vote for you." And I'm not certain if that's the same 1% we're usually concerned about, or whether they think only 1% of America dislikes cops from time to time. I don't know. "NYPD cops have been assassinated because of you. This isn't over. Game on." And I thought that this came out before, but maybe it's in reaction to there was a shooting in a police, right inside a police precinct building, a gunman who burst in and started shooting cops, probably because of it being a gun-free zone, of course. And here's this. What's interesting is it's in reaction to de Blasio taking that same line on this thing. "This was," he says, "a premeditated assassination attempt against New York's finest. It was also an attack on all New Yorkers and everything we believe in. This must be a city where everyone can live in peace and respect. This individual attempted to destroy that. We will not let him win." And amazingly enough, that is that's a message in support of the police who were attacked, but they are not having it. "We can't accept your support because you sent them to assassinate us." Now, how they come to that conclusion, I have no idea, and I don't know whether I'm ever going to be able to track something like that down, but just putting that out there, that's happening, and it's a real thing, and it's a real concern when your uniformed police are represented anyway by people who think it's appropriate to put positions like that forward. That, that you hate cops, that when cops get killed, it's your fault, that the war is on you, as opposed to perhaps, say, conducting a war against people who murder cops. That would be too obvious, I guess. Let's see. Other interesting tidbits that might be worth dipping a toe in on. I thought this was interesting. Not directly top of the news for us usually, but I thought an interesting twist. Reported by ABC News, Lindsay Whitehurst, reporting the news that Utah, the state, sends employees to Mexico for lower prescription prices. The president, of course, recently bragging that he's lowering prescription drug prices in America. And what did he say? His claim was the first time in 51 years that prescription prices, drug prices went down in this country. I assume that people are fact-checking that and finding it to be a lie because Donald Trump said it, but maybe it's true. Hasn't made a great deal of difference for most people who are already struggling to pay the cost of prescription drugs. But maybe they went down by a penny. I have no idea. But this is an interesting story. Anne Lovell, it begins, had never owned a passport before last year, which is interesting all by itself. But now, the 62-year-old teacher is a frequent flyer, traveling every few months to Tijuana, Mexico, to buy medication for rheumatoid arthritis. Rheumatoid arthritis, with tickets paid for by the state of Utah's public insurer. They have a public insurer? What? Socialism. I can't believe it. Lovell is one of about 10 state workers participating in a year-old program, not a whole lot of them, to lower prescription drug costs by having public employees buy their medication in Mexico at a steep discount compared to U.S. prices. And it must be some kind of steep discount if it can also absorb the cost of a round-trip plane ticket to Mexico and still come out less. So maybe that tells you something. The program appears to be the first of its kind and is a dramatic example of steps states are taking to alleviate the high cost of prescription drugs. In one long, exhausting day, which is not a great thing to do to people who need medication, but there you have it, Lovell flies from Salt Lake City to San Diego. There, an escort picks her up and takes her across the border to a Tijuana hospital, where she gets a refill on her prescription. After that, she's shuttled back to the airport and heads home. Lovell had been paying $450 in copays every few months for her medication, though she said it would have increased to some $2,400 if she had not started traveling to Mexico. Well, that would leave enough room for a ticket, that's for sure. Without the program, she would not be able to afford the medicine she needs. This is the drug that keeps me functioning and working, said Lovell, who works at an early intervention program for deaf students that's part of the Utah Schools for the Deaf and Blind. I think if I wasn't on this drug, I'd be on disability rather than living my normal life. The cost difference is so large that the state's insurance program for public employees can pay for each patient's flight, giving them a $500 per trip bonus and still save thousands of dollars. Wow, give them a $500 per trip bonus, I guess, to pay for your trouble on top of the ticket. That's a pretty good deal. Other states have taken new approaches to addressing the high costs of prescription drugs. California is looking at launching its own generic drug label. Louisiana has a Netflix-style program for hepatitis C drugs, where the state negotiated a deal to pay a flat fee rather than for each prescription. Netflix style? I'm not even certain what they mean by that. But that's an interesting way of putting it. Several states are looking at creating boards aimed at keeping prices affordable, and 4 have started what's expected to be a lengthy process to begin importing drugs from Canada under a new Trump administration plan. Of course, I would differentiate between that plan, which is a good one, and a plan to keep prices affordable. You're not keeping prices affordable. You're just finding different prices elsewhere. I mean, if that eventually, macroeconomic theory being what it is, will drive prices in America down. But I don't know whether that's really going to happen or not, because we have so many complicating factors here, including the warping effect of numerous private insurers operating in the same field and agreeing to pay larger or smaller chunks of that, depending on which provider you're talking about. Anyway, the Utah program was created under a 2018 state law dubbed Right to Shop by Republican Representative Norm Thurston. The Public Employees Health Program offers it only for people who are using a drug on a list of about a dozen medications where the state can get significant savings. All right, that makes sense. Of the 160,000 state and local public employees covered by the insurer, fewer than 400 are eligible, according to Managing Director Chet Loftus. So that tells you something too. Okay, so that means it's an interesting innovation, and it's worth something to note that, okay, even Republicans are seeing that this is a problem and they can address it, but it addresses the problems of fewer than 400 of the 160,000 state and local public employees who get their insurance this way. So it's not doing a great deal to change things, but it's an interesting start. Officials have tracked the medications from the manufacturer to the pharmacy to the patient to make sure people are getting the same drugs they would at home, he said. They contract with a specialty pharmacy that works with one of the region's largest private hospital systems. A representative from the company, Provide RX, escorts patients from the San Diego airport to Hospital Angeles in Tijuana and back across the border. That's nice. At least they don't drop you in San Diego and say, find your own way. So it's as convenient as flying to San Diego and driving to Tijuana and then returning in the same day can possibly be. Lovell has a prescription from her doctor in Utah, and each time she travels to Mexico, she sees a doctor at the hospital as well. She updates the doctor on her condition, gets her prescription, and takes it to the pharmacist, who gives her the medication. Provide RX also works with a dozen or so private companies, some of whom offer similar bonus programs to their staffers, said General Manager Javier Ojeda. Just over a year after the program began, the state saved about $225,000, Loftus said. That's nice. If they could help 160,000 people do it, they'd save even more. Though the number of people participating is relatively small, the savings adds up quickly. The annual U.S. list price for the drug Lovell takes, Enbrel, is over $62,000 per patient. With the Mexico program, after the cost of the flight and the bonus, the state still cuts the expense in half. It makes sense for us to do this, Loftus said. How did they get there from a Republican point of view? I don't know. Thurston had hoped more people would sign up, saving the state $1 million by now, but officials are optimistic more people will sign on now that they see the program's working. They have expanded to offering flights to Canada, where there's a clinic in the Vancouver airport. That's smart. And the travel costs are about the same. While importation of prescription drugs is illegal, because drugs sold in other countries haven't been approved by the Food and Drug Administration, the U.S. allows people to bring in a 3-month supply for personal use. There have long been more informal trips across the border elsewhere. Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders has taken bus trips with patients from border states into Canada to highlight the cost of prescription drugs. That's true. I remember him doing that for a long time now. But the Utah program appears to be the only formal state program of its kind, said David Mitchell, cancer patient and the founder of the advocacy group Patients for Affordable Drugs. It is unfortunate, and in fact wrong, that the citizens of this great country have to travel to other countries to get drugs that they need at affordable prices. Others say the pharmaceutical tourism approach has risks and doesn't solve the issue of high prescription drugs in the United States. Oh, that's true. Not by itself. Peter Maybarduk, I'm guessing, Maybarduk, with the nonprofit advocacy group Public Citizen, said people can come across unsafe medications in other countries, and it's important not to undercut the importance of U.S. regulators. It's a Band-Aid for people who really need it, he said. We need reform of the system as a whole. That's obviously true. But I will say they've done about as good a job as they can, not only making it easier to get there and back, but it would be a questionable undertaking if you just said, well, we'll get you to say, we'll pay for you to go back and forth, but you do your own work in making sure you're actually getting the right drugs and that they're safe. But here she's backed up by professional staff here at the Provide RX outside agency. And, I guess if you could be guaranteed that you're getting the right stuff every time, that's really well worth doing. I just find it interesting that Utah would be first out of the box. And I guess because it's Utah, it should be no surprise that Republican legislators are the ones doing it. That's pretty much the only way you could get anything passed through the Republican legislature, or the Utah legislature, is to have a Republican put their name to it. All right. Well, interesting. So keep note of that, and perhaps we can push other states into doing something similar. Let's see. Other things worth putting out there for discussion. Another item here that we missed our chance to discuss yesterday. Washington Post. Lisa Rein, R-E-I-N, reporting under the headline, VA Chief Wilkie sought to dig up dirt on woman who complained of sexual assault, agency insiders say. All the good stuff happening in the federal agencies under Donald Trump. It's really amazing. This is the VA, the Veterans Affairs Department's Inspector General, now reviewing a request from a top House leader to investigate allegations that VA Secretary Robert Wilkie, who is, of course, you may remember from previous stories, taking his orders from 3 of Donald Trump's pals down in Mar-a-Lago, running the agency by remote. And what's he doing? He's seeking to dig up dirt on one of the congressman's aides after she said she was sexually assaulted at VA's Washington hospital. How about that? That's pretty amazing. The appeal late Friday from House Veterans Affairs Committee Chairman Mark Takano, this is not good, came after he received information from senior VA officials confirmed by the Washington Post that Wilkie worked to discredit the credibility of the aide, senior policy advisor Andrea Goldstein. Wilkie, who led the Pentagon's vast personnel and readiness operation before his VA appointment, quietly began inquiring with military officials last fall, I'll just finish this up here, about Goldstein's past. According to 3 people with knowledge of his efforts, that is when Goldstein said a man groped and propositioned her in the main lobby of VA Medical Center in Washington. Wow. Authorities closed the case in January without bringing charges. So there's more to it, but perhaps we'll get to that a little bit later. Joan McCarter now joins us. Good morning, Joan. How you doing?
Good morning. I am fine.
Okay, that is good news. What's happening? What the hell's going on in the world? I'm just offering up a sampling of stories here just for everybody to I've missed so many. We've gone so in depth. We've spent a lot of time, perhaps too much, on the granular Iowa fallout all the way into yesterday. But I think we're over that now for the time being. And I imagine we'll have more tonight.
Well, there are a few things about Iowa that are kind of actually good.
Okay.
Like the fact that it was such a disaster.
Oh, yes. Oh, the hasten the revolution theory. Okay.
Yes.
It's finally working.
We're going to be doing caucuses again, at least not in Iowa.
I wonder. It's going to take
one
a
of
lot
the things that was interesting to me that was brought up that I hadn't thought of before was probably the fact that the Sanders campaign did insist on all of the transparency, that everything had to be recorded, that they had to show their work, that they had to do
that's not a bad
show
idea.
the votes in every step, really highlighted the fact that probably Iowa has always been this screwed up. We just didn't know it before.
Yeah, so he's done us a service here, and it's very difficult to point to being wrong to ask for transparency.
Sure, having done caucuses, they are so chaotic. I know that they don't actually reflect what happens in the room because people come and go, and it's hard to count, and it's fluid, and everybody's moving around. So you can't, if you have more than, say, 50, 100 people in the room, you're not going to get right numbers, good numbers. Nothing's going to add up. So probably the caucuses in Iowa have always been this chaotic and this bad and this inaccurate.
Yeah.
We just know it now because they had to show their work.
Yes, and I guess it sounds like it was a good idea to include, I guess this was the new innovation, was the cards that you sign and write down your preference, because otherwise I don't know how you keep track of people who aren't permitted to realign, or how you keep track of people who just leave to go to the bathroom or just leave because they give up. But look, I came and I stood in a corner for a viable candidate. I can't stay another 5 hours, but
Right.
count me.
I did my thing and I left.
Yeah.
And then how does that affect the counts if they're not there for the second count? And,
Right.
Yeah.
So it sounds like they made a lot of good changes, but by tracking everything that's actually happening, you get a clearer idea of how this could not possibly be giving you a clear idea of what happened here.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I don't know that was it wasn't, I don't think, the aim. Last time around, it sounded like the Bernie Sanders camp was generally pleased with the caucus model because they performed well there, and they play to the strengths of what, at least of the 2016 Bernie Sanders campaign, if not necessarily this one. Okay, whatever, fair enough. I don't like the idea of caucuses in general, but adding layers of transparency. Can you do that? I guess so. Adding layers of transparent tape to the process, it shouldn't hurt it. But I wouldn't be surprised if necessarily it turned out to be the case that Bernie Sanders, while he was happy with his performance at caucuses, never thought caucuses were a great idea either, and maybe he wanted to show exactly why. But I think it was an unintended consequence.
I think so. Yeah, I think it
not a
definitely
bad
was an unintended consequence. But hey, more power to
that's
everybody who did that.
I guess.
Although I feel kind of bad for the Iowa. Iowa. I almost said Idaho.
Did it. Amazing.
I feel bad for the actual people involved because a lot of them were volunteers.
Yes.
They put a lot of effort and time and blood and sweat and tears into this, and I feel bad for them.
Yeah, and a lot of them tried their best to maintain that transparency, and things went wrong, and then it was a bad situation to begin with, and they had to make decisions about how to correct it and how to correct it in a way that they could actually handle. I guess I don't feel too bad, for instance, though, about people who say, well, instead of actually recounting all of the cards, let's just recanvass the tally sheets because I don't know how to use a spreadsheet, and this is going to get messy if...
Yeah.
But you have to know how to do that.
Yeah.
That's not good. I don't feel bad for
Or
her.
you just have to say, okay, this has gotten far too complex and we just need to have everybody's vote counted. Let's do it by a primary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But we'll see what happens in Nevada.
Yes.
I have a feeling it's not going to be so chaotic in Nevada, but...
They run a different kind of caucus, it seems. They have a very odd system in and around the Las Vegas area that anticipates a lot of coming and going, and they structure their caucus very differently, and they're large, and they know allegedly what they're doing there. I don't know whether...
And a lot of it's run by folks who also lead unions.
Right.
And so they are used to doing this kind of activity.
Yes.
Organizing people.
Right. And counting them up and getting... I don't know. I mean, maybe it'll turn out that the count is no more accurate than it's ever been, and everybody there just understands, it's Nevada, it's the unions, we got it about right. And I don't know. I'm uncertain whether any more layers of double checking are being imposed on Nevada, but we'll see. It's not the last caucus either, but Iowa's the one that everybody had an eye on. And,
yeah.
Oh, well.
There are very few caucuses left, though. 3 or 4 at most.
Yeah, fewer and fewer states.
I think the elections folks counted them up earlier, and I wasn't paying attention. But a lot of states have switched to primaries, including mine. Thank goodness. I get to actually vote. Yes. I don't know if it'll make a difference by the time I get to in the late March, but I get to.
Yeah. That's, that is good. Late March is early for there not to be any difference made either these days. But, I have to vote early-ish too, so that's a new one for me. Anyway, so we've got our first break coming up. We can regroup for 2 minutes and figure out where we'll go from here. But I think we're done with for the most part, with the worrying about Iowa thing. And again, I guess with
and you already covered New Hampshire. I don't want to talk about New Hampshire,
Sure.
But I do have some fun Susan Collins tidbits.
Okay, that's always fun. Let's do that. We'll be back in 2 minutes, and promise to deliver you that. Hang on, and we'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Joan McCarter is still with us. I think in our discussions behind the scenes, and hopefully they were behind the scenes. You never know sometimes with the way we run things. But sounds like we're off to Maine next. We'll stay, it's not New Hampshire, but same area. But there's not too much to say about New Hampshire just yet, except that
Maine and, intriguingly,
yes,
Hawaii.
That is the other direction.
Yes.
Okay.
And this is kind of a fun story if you, like me, are kind of obsessed with Susan Collins being Susan Collins.
Well, I am deeply disturbed by it. Yes.
Last week was a crew that uncovered there was an FEC complaint against a group calling itself the Society for Women in SYSE, Society of Young Women Scientists and Engineers.
Oh.
Based in Hawaii, that had made a six-figure donation, $150,000, to the 1820 PAC, a PAC that had been set up last year or the year before. I think it was last year, just to support Susan Collins. 1820 was the year that Maine was founded. That's why they call it 1820 PAC.
Okay.
So, $150,000 from this PAC that nobody had ever heard of before in Hawaii, whose only officer, the only name associated with it, was Jennifer Lamb. And this was just kind of a mystery. Only 7 people have actually donated to the 1820 PAC. More than $750,000, and now this $150,000 from this place in Hawaii that nobody had ever heard of before. So Honolulu City Beat did some digging, and they found out that the shell company, SYWSC, Society for Young Women in Science and Engineering, is actually the Hawaii-based defense contractor Navitech LLC, which is based in Hawaii. Headed up by a guy named Cow, Martin Cow, who happens to be married to a woman named Tiffany Jennifer Lamb.
Oh.
Yeah.
Jennifer Lamb. Okay, interesting. Dropping the Tiffany.
Turns out that in early August of 2019, Navitech was awarded an $8 million contract from the U.S. Navy Office of Naval Research And it furthermore turns out that that contract came through Susan Collins' efforts on the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, which she chairs.
Huh. So money to Hawaii for a contract for... Was there a main... I don't know if there's a main angle, but...
I'm sure there's a main angle because that's what she does.
You would hope. Okay.
But what makes it all particularly galling is let's go back to the Kavanaugh nomination.
Okay.
And the grassroots organization that sprung up in Maine in order to start raising funds against Collins for her future opponent. Remember what she said about that?
Not specifically.
At the time, she said she considered it quid pro quo fundraising that was the equivalent of an attempted bribe.
Is that bad?
Is that bad?
Not certain. Okay, so I guess she at the time rejected this sort of quid pro quo. Okay, so it was an attempt to bribe her to vote against Kavanaugh if people raised money saying, if you vote for him, we'll give this money to your opponent. Okay, so that's a quid pro quo. But
if you don't vote for him, these are only pledges. We'll return them all to the people who made them.
Okay. Yeah.
I consider this quid pro quo fundraising to be the equivalent of an attempt to bribe me to vote against Judge Kavanaugh, she said.
All right.
Huh.
Yeah. But I guess if you actually deliver the money, it's still a bribe, but she likes it better. Maybe. I don't know. She gets the money.
She gets the money.
Deeply disturbing. Deeply.
It's concerning.
Yes. Deeply troubled by it.
Yes.
Well, okay. That's surprising / not surprising.
Not at all surprising.
Yeah. Interesting, though. Hawaii. Well, okay.
Yeah. They must be, because Portland has the shipyards and has defense stuff there, naval defense stuff.
Could be anything. I don't know what the
Bangor,
Hawaii
wherever it is
company
in Maine. I should know this, shouldn't I? I should learn everything I need to about Maine because,
that'll become
obviously, the
Yeah.
next 9 months are going to be rather subsumed by Susan Collins for me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess it's not hard to come up with the connection. If they manufacture a component that goes into something that they build in Maine, that's enough.
Yeah.
But why the subterfuge? Why the pretending that the contribution had come from a society of young women in engineering or whatever it is? Is the woman who's associated with is she an engineer? I don't know, but
the only thing we know about her is that she's married to the guy, the CEO of Navitech. So
yeah.
And by the way, her husband, and all of the officers of Navitech, just 2 weeks after this big announcement of the contract that was awarded to them, donated to the Max to Collins campaign. That was the stuff above board. That was the light money, you might call it, as opposed to the dark money that came through the society. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Not a quid pro quo, though.
No, because
not a bribe,
reasons.
not at all. Just regular how business is done in Washington.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, and of course, the fact that it comes immediately after getting a large chunk of money from the federal government, that you can kick back part of it. I know you can give the max because we just gave you a contract.
Yeah.
So it's a quid pro quo in both directions. Well, that's
just
that's
very interesting timing to have all of this come out the week after the impeachment vote.
Yeah. All right. Well, all the more reason
in which
for targeting Collins.
Pro quo wasn't adequately proven.
Oh yeah.
To Susan Collins.
Yes. Well, I don't know what that means. She doesn't want it proven against her, so obviously she has very high standards.
Yes. Yeah. But she kind of knows how it works, I think.
I guess so. She's not, completely checked out. She knows what she's doing.
She knows what she's doing. She's always known what she's doing.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Has luckily been able to skate through without anybody paying attention until now.
Yeah. Well, it's now the focus on, I guess, with fewer and fewer people claiming the mantle, even though it was always false, of Republican moderate, it's easier to focus on it. There were, 5 ahead of her that had to go first.
Yep.
And now it's your turn.
Now we only have Romney, I guess, who, put his vote where his mouth was on that one.
At least one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he may have 2 mouths as well, so maybe that's why. That was even... That all fell apart within 5 minutes. Oh, well, he may be doing something courageous. Oh, I see. He's voting yes on one and no on the other.
50% courageous.
All right. Well, that's better than nothing. And we learned that...
Well, as far as Trump was concerned, he may as well have voted yes on both.
Yeah, right. I mean, he won't get any credit for the no. Certainly. No. So fine. Okay. And now that Trump is quite obviously retaliating, that's an issue for Collins, too. She, of course, gave her opinion that, I voted to acquit because I think he's learned his lesson, or at least I hope so, or at least there's proof that he didn't, but I don't care. Is my
and
turn.
how dare Adam Schiff say our heads are on pikes?
Right.
Or might be.
Right. Though that may be the case. I'm just saying. I don't know. But so she doesn't come out well from this or Kavanaugh. I wonder if she misses the days where she was being publicly celebrated in parades in Maine for having voted. Was on the healthcare issues, as I recall, years ago, and people coming,
3 short years ago.
Yeah, ducking the rope line to get in there to shake her hand and congratulate her and thank her, all the way down to now. Of course, she thinks every time she goes home, she now tells the press that she's under death threat. That's her new thing.
Yes. So. No, it's not new. That started with Kavanaugh.
Oh, okay. Well, that's new for me. I'm 100 years old. We've been around a long time. Oh, you mean since Trump? That's new. But yes, she does. That's her new standby, I guess. So she's done that for Kavanaugh.
Which is how you know she's a true Republican. Right. She plays the victim card.
Yeah. It's very common. And
these people, even things. When they had the trifecta, when they had the House, the Congress, and the Senate, they were the underdogs. They were the victims. Yes. It's such a strange, when they are such bullies, and so obviously their rhetoric is violent, their rhetoric is bullying, they really try to be the alphas in the room, but at the same time they have this deep underdog victimization thing going. Yeah. That just is bizarre to me.
Well, right.
I'll never understand the psychology of a Republican.
Yeah, it's really a mystery, but it's kind of an across-the-board thing, right? White males have it the worst in this country. We're persecuted worse than any other group. Okay. Just thanks for coming to tell us here at the state capitol with your rifle. Go on around the metal detector.
We had one of those last week.
Yeah. Oh, really? That recently?
Yeah. But it snowed, so they had to be inside the Capitol instead of outside.
Mm-hmm. Did they?
Because snow.
Yeah, look out for that.
Yeah.
I don't know how you deal with that in Idaho. They got any specialized equipment or?
Yeah. Generally, they like to have the outside the optics are a lot better because we've got a neoclassical Capitol. It's modeled on the U.S. Capitol and is beautiful, and you get great pictures and all of that. And so they like to be out there, but not in the snow.
Oh, I thought snow would enhance that, but
it might make their guns wet.
And then you can't have that because then they don't work and tyranny happens.
Yes.
All right. Well, I mean, Kentucky, they seem to be reveling at being inside the Capitol. Maybe the pictures are better in there than outside at Kentucky.
Did you see the video of them at the security checkpoint going into the Kentucky Capitol?
Yes, going around the metal detectors.
Around the metal
That
detectors.
was a good one. Right. I see you have a large weapon there, which is what this is here to detect. But I guess it doesn't need to detect it. Well, it's like they get charged per detection.
So come on in.
Right. I see it. Yeah, that was pretty amazing. Although also, I guess score one for the bureaucracy too. They also, a lot of the people who went in, not all of them, but the ones who became famous-ish because they were photographed, were in masks as well, which is usually kind of a no-no, generally speaking. But they did have to register and then wear name tags that they got at security, which it's like, well, the mask. Right. In the photo, it works, right? People can't see my face, but then they forgot. If you have a good, enhancement program, photo enhancement, I guess you can go and zoom in on the name tags, and then the purpose of the mask is lost. But the purpose of the mask was really just to play act, mercenary anyway.
And it's, more intimidation.
Yes. And there's a lot of it going around, and
the KKK rally in Washington, D.C. over the weekend, same thing. They had the masks on.
Yes. Sort of a new, updated version of the white mask. They now do those clingy face maskings, but in white and over the whole face and over the top of the head, too. So they kind of look like, I don't know what. Like, I guess they would be like the white man group if they were performing in Las Vegas.
Members in white?
Maybe. Yeah. The mask thing, it was new and unusual, and of course dismaying to watch them being able to demonstrate with police escort because of how tough they are. But it's one of our free speech things here in the country, and I don't know why we honor it in the face of their dishonoring it, but it's just one of those things we do as law-abiding citizens from time to time until we get shot by these idiots. But oh well.
Oh, well.
Sad times. Right. You had said that the rest of the news was depressing, and you're right.
Well, the rest of the news is depressing. We've got sort of a semi-splash was Trump's budget released yesterday.
Ah, yes. Right.
In which, of course, he's protecting Social Security and Medicare, in which, of course, he's cutting Social Security and Medicare and continuing on in his efforts to just completely destroy Medicaid.
Yeah.
Despite the agreement that they made for the 2-year budget last year, he popped up with this budget that gives a, 5% increase to defense spending and cuts domestic spending. Of course, this is not an operable budget. It's nothing that Congress is going to accept, but as Nancy Pelosi always likes to say, show me your budget, show me your values. And the values for Trump are pretty much grift.
Yeah. At this stage, with Trump being who he is, I do sometimes wonder. I don't mean to give him the benefit of the doubt with this by any means, but there's some significant chance that he has no idea what's in his budget. And so, it may be that in his mind, I said I was protecting Social Security, but your budget cuts it. What? Not that I care, because that's not the budget that'll be passed. Or I was lying when I said it. That's always, the first thing you would suspect. But there's also the possibility that I don't know what's in here, and that his budget people at OMB probably, it was the easiest budget they ever wrote. They just say, well, if we want the numbers to be lower, we'll just slash something that, may or may not. We may or may not care if it's really slashed, but the Congress will never go for it. So
right.
If you need it to come in lower, just lower that number. Don't worry about it.
And we'll say we're not going to be blowing deficits by increasing defense spending and doing more tax cuts because there's going to be 3% growth.
Oh.
Nobody thinks there's going to be 3% growth in the next year or even in the next 10 years. Most traditional economists think it's going to be about 1.8. CBO and Federal Reserve put it between 2% and 2.2%. But the administration is convinced it's going to be 3%.
Yeah. Well, they get to say whatever they want. I don't know why they don't say 10%. It's going
Yeah.
to be the greatest ever. In fact, cut taxes some more because of how good it's going to be. But I guess they didn't go for that this time around. But the president's budget rarely
while
passes.
there is not going to be legislation within this budget that does enact those cuts, that doesn't mean they're not happening. Because the administration is doing it through rules and regulations.
Yes, that is a good point. That
we have
can't tell.
2 on Medicaid that are very scary, the block grants, which states may or may not take. I'm really hoping they don't, but there are going to be some idiot states that certainly think that sounds like a good idea.
Sure.
And another Medicaid financing tweak that is going to mean a lot less money going to states and is going to hit rural areas particularly hard. It's a change in the formula how states can calculate the amount of money that the federal government needs to match for them. Mm-hmm. So it's taking out some forms of aid that they get from state and local taxes and state and local grants, not allowing them to count that as Medicaid funding to be matched by the federal government. So Texas alone is going to lose, they think, $11 billion.
Wow.
Billion with a B in Medicaid funding, which is going to absolutely result in more rural hospitals being closed.
Yes, almost certainly. But Trump doesn't have many fans in rural parts of America, so.
No, right. So this is just the bizarre thing. He keeps attacking his own people. And it's not just Medicaid patients. A lot of doctors are going to see they can't get paid as much because the state doesn't have the money to pay them along with the federal government. So they're going to stop taking Medicaid patients.
Yes.
But when a hospital closes in a rural area in a county that's got Medicaid and non-Medicaid patients, it hurts everybody exactly the same. If you don't have a hospital to go to when you have a heart attack that's, close by,
right. I have
your
money.
chances of dying are a lot higher.
Yeah. I've got money, I just got no hospital to spend it at.
So while the actual budget that Trump put through doesn't cut these things, the actual actions that Trump is taking will.
It's hard to know.
Social Security disability. They're doing this new formula for how Social Security disability insurance recipients are reviewed. And the purpose of these eligibility reviews are to get people off the program. They're ramping those up for a certain segment of people, about 1 million people, who are generally older and who are on disability because they can't do the job that they used to do anymore. They might be able to do a different job if that different job is available to them. So they're not totally disabled. They're capable of working, but there's no job for them, so they're on Social Security disability, which amounts to about $1,200 a month average for folks. With, not particularly generous subsistence level funding. These folks will have to report more frequently and have a much higher chance of being cut off.
Yeah.
And again, the people who are going to be hurt most are the rural folks, because many of them live in counties that have no Social Security offices. All of the work that they have to do to prove that they're still eligible has to go through Social Security offices. Lots of paperwork, meetings. They can't get there.
Yeah.
So they'll just lose their benefits.
Well, if they stay at home and die very quickly, no one will know the difference.
And
I guess that's the plan.
I mean, that's always been the plan on everything with these people.
Well, it's. I don't understand the logic of it. Just like you were saying before, you can never really understand what's driving Republicans about this stuff. But yeah, that's true. They can get away with an awful lot, and a lot of the traditional, you have to keep that in mind with Trump, a lot of the traditional restraints on the president and on budget cuts, the ability to enact budget cuts or to even propose budget cuts as the president. Traditionally, that stuff falls apart in the legislative process, but then so what if it's legislated differently? I'll just do this anyway.
Right.
And then we'll all say, well, we'll sue. And then the courts will say, you're not allowed to sue, or whoever you are, you don't have standing.
Or
it
takes so long to get through the process. Everybody is suing on all of these things.
Right.
But in the meantime, they're being enacted.
Right. So, a lot of good that does me if I'm sitting
some
there
of them
waiting
get
for a check.
enjoined, but not all of them. And it's gruesome out there.
And then they get enjoined, and then sometimes the administration says, that doesn't apply to me. It has your name on it. Ah, right. True. But I'm not listening. That's the point. I'm going to enact this anyway, and you, as a federal judge, have no right to enjoin me from doing this. And sometimes they just say, to hell with it. We were never serious in the first place. We'll let it go.
Most of these things, particularly the Social Security disability one's trickier. I don't know that there's anybody that will have standing to sue. I don't know that it contravenes Social Security law. All of the Medicaid things he's done definitely do. Yeah. Definitely they are outside of what the Medicaid statute allows the federal government to do. And, hopefully states will look at that because most of it has to come through state waivers. Hopefully states will look at it and think, we can't afford the lawsuit. Now, if it's Idaho, the favorite thing to do in Idaho is to sue the federal government for something or another, or to take on ridiculous lawsuits that they have to spend a lot of money on because they're standing up to the libs.
I've done that, yes.
I don't know that every state is that bad.
Okay.
We'll see.
Well, all right. Yeah, this is going to be difficult to predict the outcome of. It used to be easier, but now, of course, sometimes we just have judges who say, I don't really have anything here to help, but I know you need help there, Trump administration. So what the hell? Yes, you can do that. And
by the way, let's just declare the whole Affordable Care Act unconstitutional.
Right. We could do that. You can appeal that, but by the time you get around to it, maybe it goes our way, maybe it doesn't. There's so many varying factors when LOL, YOLO, nothing matters is a governing principle.
Yeah.
You don't know what to do with predicting this. Ordinarily, the president's budget, the favorite phrase on Capitol Hill about the president's budget is it's dead on arrival. Everybody says it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But this is the age of zombies, and you have to be aware of the fact that the Congress would explicitly reject something doesn't mean it's not going to come back to haunt you at the behest of the executive branch anyway.
Like, hey, we're giving all of this money to Ukraine. We've appropriated it. It's going to go to Ukraine now. Yeah, not so much.
Not really.
Or Puerto Rico.
Yes, which is, unlike Ukraine, American.
American.
So, but yeah, this happens all the time, and in a number of all the various disaster relief funds that were appropriated for Puerto Rico that don't show up, and you just say, I don't understand. I thought they had the power of the purse. Yeah, well, if you can take it out of my hands, then you can have power over it. But no.
What's astounding to me that it isn't just Puerto Rico. When Harvey hit Texas so hard, Texas didn't get all of the money it was supposed to get that was appropriated. And, John Cornyn and Ted Cruz just sort of,
Well, that sounds bad, but, there's worse things in the world, I guess. It's amazing that they don't put up more of a stink, but maybe they're afraid their heads will be on pikes.
Maybe.
That could be it, right. So the big lie about the pikes was that it was all about impeachment when it could be about anything. I might just put your head on pikes because my friend owns a pike company. And I I want to acquire them for the federal government.
That would definitely make him do it.
Consolidated Pikes. It pays for my Mar-a-Lago membership. That would explain a lot. All right. Wow. Well, this is rather depressing.
Thanks for the laugh, Kagro. That's a good thing to go out on.
Yeah, let's do that then. All right. Thanks, Joan. Thanks for coming by. And, we'll be spotlighting Maine. We're looking at you, Susan Collins. I appreciate your focus on that. We'll talk to you next week. And we'll have some results, I guess, too. Right. All right. Thanks very much. See you next Tuesday. And take care. Joan McCarter, everybody, our senior political writer, as you well know. Always a pleasure to have her around. And speaking of pleasures to have around, Justice Putnam and the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy comes up next. Imagine if there were a program that made up for all the deficiencies of our focus on topics for 20, 30, 40 minutes at a time. Well, there is such a thing. You need not imagine it, and it comes up next, right here on Netroots Radio.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Let's go down to the end of the description of the program here for the international news, where the U.S. has charged 4 Chinese military hackers in 2017 Equifax breach that affected over 150 million Americans. We haven't had a chance to talk about it, and it's extraordinarily important. Thank God justice takes care of it.